to usher in the messianic age. They don't mind if it's brought on by nuclear age. They are so sure of their ability to outlive the utility of their bodies. But just remember that was the last thought in the brain of every suicide bomber and every hijack plane. Follow the guidebook for an afterlife. Which one do I try?
Welcome to another episode of the Stay-at-Home Atheist podcast. I'm John, and I am the Stay-at-Home Atheist.
And I'm Stacey. So if this is your first time joining us, we'd like to just refresh our mission with everyone. And if not, it's not a bad thing to listen to again. So our mission is to challenge antiquated views on family values, particularly those in line with religious and conservative perspectives, and to promote secular and forward-thinking alternatives.
Before we get started, the song you were listening to during our intro is by Shelley Siegel. The song is called Afterlife. You can check her out at shelleysiegel.com. She has a page on Facebook, and you can find her music basically anywhere you'd find music. iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. Check it out. I highly recommend it.
And our art and animation is by Phillip Gunter.
Thanks, Colonel. Okay, so this episode, we wanted to talk a little bit about something that's been in the news recently. It's going to be maybe somewhat controversial, so just bear with us. We want to talk about...
If we piss you off, sorry.
Right? So sad. Unsubscribe, it's fine. We don't mind. No, we want to talk about the recent passing of Republican Senator John McCain. He died on the 25th. And basically, there's been a lot of online controversy. You know, there seems to be a couple camps of people. I think maybe I can boil them down to three. There's the people who are, you know, kind of understandably trying to be respectful and adopt a respectful tone because they feel like when someone dies, you know, they have family and they don't think they should contribute to a negative outlet. Right. And I understand that perspective. So they tend to share things or post things about the good things that a person did, and in this case, the good things John McCain did. Then there's kind of like neutral people, right? That just they're like, I'm not going to touch that shit with a 10-foot pole. That's kind of my camp. I think I did share something kind of negative, but for the most part, I've just decided to not really go there on my own page. I contribute to other people's content. I'll comment, you know. And then, of course, there's the more negative side of people who are, I think, also very rightfully kind of happy that another person who they disagree with politically is out of the picture politically. I don't necessarily think that has to mean death. I think it could mean retirement or whatever, right? But there's a voice that has been very conservative and against a lot of things that more liberal progressives are
removed.
for.
Right.
And now he's not there submitting votes. And I think I completely understand why people think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in the days of social media now, it's much more prevalent to have a conversation on any side of that spectrum, right? When somebody passes, especially somebody that's been in public life and politics for a long time and has quite a long record. And I think there is a natural maybe
inclination.
Yeah, inclination to try to make them better than they were in honoring their death. So that's not to say that John McCain didn't do good things. He fought for our country. He served our country well. He protected his men in battle. There were a lot of good things that he did, but there were also a lot of bad things. So what we want to do is kind of run down some of our key thoughts on John McCain.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the bad things you do in life don't necessarily
wiped away.
Wipe away. Well, I was going to say they don't wipe away the good things just because you did bad things, but conversely,
right,
neither do the good things wipe away the bad things. And I think it's important to see the entire picture and to respect people's ability to express themselves regardless as to whether or not you agree with that perspective. So I'm going to go through, this is going to be a little dry, some of it, just some bullet notes basically that I wrote down that I wanted to make sure I hit. It's not by any means exhaustive. I mean, please feel free to go do your own research and read about John McCain if that's what you want to do. And then we're going to kind of talk about some of our thoughts about it more specifically. So, he voted against abortion rights in general, 115 out of 119 votes that he cast during his tenure. He co-sponsored an abortion ban bill that failed, obviously. In 2007, he said that he wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade and amend our Constitution to federally ban abortion, which personally, I'm going to do a little aside here, I find very interesting because a lot of the other things that he seems to look positive on, really what he's done is say that these should be states' rights issues. So it's just interesting to me that he'll often say, oh, no, I don't want to talk about that. That's the state's issue. But federally, he wanted to ban abortion. So there's a little bit of a obvious hypocrisy there, I think.
Well, I think when you start doing research like we were this morning, you see that there are several articles out there now after his death that highlight some of those items where it's a little bit fuzzy as to where he stood on the issue, because he would rely on saying it's states' rights to get away with not actually stating his convictions on the issue.
Absolutely. Well, and he did on a number of occasions state his convictions, and some of those will be in here. By the way, Stace, don't say this morning. Let's pretend we researched it 3 days ago and every day leading up to this.
Yes.
No, we were a little behind this week, or this 2 weeks, or whatever you want to call it. So, he was also against the federal funding for birth control and sex education. He supported the death penalty. He supported mandatory prison terms for drug dealers, and he also supported harsher prison terms in general for drug offenses, though notably also for gun offenses. And he was kind of in favor of restricting access of firearms to people with mental disabilities or people who had shown a propensity toward violence and things. So there's some good there too. He voted against the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, which would have prohibited discrimination against employees on the basis of sexual orientation. I think that was one of those that should be a state's issue. He was in favor of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, stating that it should not be repealed because it worked. And I can tell you that policy was around when I was in the military, and I think it caused more hardship because, you're not supposed to ask, but of course people do all the time. And then you're not allowed to tell, so you can't be honest about yourself. I think the whole thing was a pretty ugly mark in our history. He also voted against repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And despite voting against federal gay marriage ban, claiming that it was a states' rights issue, he did support a ban on same-sex marriage in his own state of Arizona. And that's what we were talking about before, where he said, we shouldn't do a federal ban against same-sex marriage because that should be a states' rights issue. And some people applauded him for that because a lot of other Republicans in particular wanted to federally ban gay marriage. And he said, well, we shouldn't do that. But then he went back home to Arizona and held right up a bill saying we should ban gay marriage. Yeah. So his position there is very, very clear. He once said he didn't believe in gay adoption. I don't know how you cannot believe in it. You could disagree with it, I suppose. But in 2008, he said that preservatives and vaccines seem to be the culprit behind the rise in autism. So that's obviously something we're very passionate about. It's completely untrue. And I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of his views have changed over time, sometimes for the better. I mean, I think, I forget which group, but one of the human rights groups had voted him or rated him at 0% on gay issues, LGBT issues for a long time. And then by the end of his career, closer to his death, they rated him at 33%. So there was a definitive improvement there.
Just not enough.
Yeah, it's still not enough to say that he was pro-gay rights. So it's okay to change your views. Like I said, some were for the better, some were for the worse. It's good to change your views,
right? It's good to grow. But in summation of all of what he has done, there didn't seem to be enough growth to, in my opinion, honor him in his death. From me. Well, I think from the way I feel, right?
I agree. And I actually totally agree. And that's what we're going to get into now. But I did kind of want to just throw out there, I think an interesting thing is to point out is it doesn't matter that he got somewhat better, particularly on LGBT issues, because the way he voted and the types of bills he tried to pass through and did pass through in his state and then tried to work on federally on some occasions were very against the LGBT community.
Yeah.
So that harm doesn't go away just because he had a 33% increase from a human rights council. You know what I mean? It doesn't change what he did in the past. And I think what I'd like to start with on the more personal discussion about how we feel is I'm sort of actually echoing a recent episode of the Atheist Experience. Matt Dillahunty said a couple things I thought were really positive. And the reality is just because you aren't the type of person who wants to point out the negative things in the wake of someone's death doesn't mean that those people don't have a right to do it. And in fact, more than a right, I think sometimes they feel a need to do it. When you've been harmed by someone in this way, directly or indirectly, then you have every right to express that to other people.
Speak up, right? It is your right to share your opinion, and I think, as we were preparing and talking about this discussion, it reminds you that just because something didn't impact you personally, and maybe it's uncomfortable to talk about, so if you feel bad about saying bad things about someone who has passed, you've got to remember that you can't ignore the bad just because someone has passed away. And if it hasn't impacted you, you can't also just sit idly by and ignore it.
Yeah, I think I while we were writing up some of these bullets and stuff, I thought a lot about Mother Teresa and how when she died and now she's, I guess, canonized. I mean, there's the whole thing now. And people don't want to look at the realities of the negative aspects of her. In fact, I have an uncle who I respect a great deal who was upset with me for posting negative things about Mother Teresa. And I think a lot of, particularly of atheists, they don't seem to mind posting negative things about Mother Teresa, but I do know a lot of them who were upset with people for posting negative things about John McCain, and I find that to be a little hypocritical. Yep. I mean, I don't think it makes you a bad person. I think we all kind of put up blinders, and we don't see our own imperfections when it comes to these types of things. But I think it's just important to note that, I'm actually going to sort of backtrack a little bit. I am a middle-aged, white, cisgender, heterosexual male. Okay, I have all of the possible privileges afforded me, and and I'm a military veteran. Yeah, I have all of the privileges. So there is an aspect of me, almost like a knee-jerk reaction, that's like, oh, don't say negative things about someone who just died, because none of these things have ever affected me, ever. And that's kind of when I realized my own problem here, because I don't have that issue with Mother Teresa, because the things she did in the name of religion, I think, negatively affect the world, and it's why I'm outspoken as an atheist. So it was very easy for me to talk about her. But my knee-jerk reaction to John McCain was a little different, because as a veteran myself, I respected his military service. He was a prisoner of war for 5 years. He went through a lot of hardship. He is a man with a family, and he has a wife, and I was going to say kids. I don't know how many kids he has. At least a daughter who's in the public eye. And it's like, I kind of had this knee-jerk, well, let's not trash someone. His family could see. But the reality is, why not? When you are in the public light, when you're a politician, when you're making an impact on the world, I believe it is only fair to make sure that you look at both sides of the issue. All of the harm that he has done to the LGBT community, to abortion rights, all of those things shouldn't be ignored and swept under the rug. And as uncomfortable as it is, and I didn't post anything personally on my wall. I kind of stayed in that neutral camp as well. Though I posted on other people's comments that were negative comments, right? And I kind of steered clear of positive comments. I didn't like them. I didn't make comments on those. I just kind of ignored them. Which is hard to do when everybody is posting how we just lost one of the good ones. And I thought, but what makes him a good one? What good has he done? Honestly, I think, and I talked to my friend Janet about this recently too, I think a lot of what people say about John McCain is that he was kind of an outsider in an insider's world. He was a maverick, all this stuff, right? But here's the thing. Yeah, he voted against party lines some, but when it came time for him to get his shot at running for president, he did exactly what they told him to do. He kowtowed to their wishes. He abandoned that maverick persona and appointed as his vice presidential running mate Sarah Palin, who was completely detrimental to his attempts at actually being president. And he did that because they said he had to. Because somebody told him that was the right thing to do. And he acknowledged that later on. He acknowledged that was likely an error, and he was trying to toe the party line. And that's the thing. When it was important, it didn't matter. When something was important for him, he did what he had to do to try to win. Yep. It wasn't about the right thing to do. So I just get annoyed
people. It was about the right thing to do for his party and for his job, right? Not for the people that he should be representing.
I agree completely. And that's why it frustrated me so much to see all these like, oh, he was a maverick. He moved to the beat of his own drum. He didn't toe the party. Yes, he did. He did do all those things. Yeah. He wasn't the maverick he claimed to be. Not later on, maybe early. But guess what? I still disagreed with almost all of his policy positions, even when he was Maverick John McCain.
So, kind of just to wrap this up, because I think we've probably beaten this one a little bit. I think in the long run, it's hard to do the right thing sometimes in the public eye. And it's okay to kind of stand in the center a little, as long as you start to realize what really happened. And I feel like we both stood in the center a little, but have thought about it a lot and really agree that he shouldn't just be honored for his service. And it doesn't wipe away all the pain and the poor policies that he pushed, signed into law, and voted for.
And even though this is an obvious extreme, and I don't mean to compare him to Hitler because they're not the same, it reminds me of, I've heard a lot like, I'm sure you could find something Hitler wrote that I would agree with. Because everybody's going to have views that you don't hate. That doesn't change all the horrible, horrible views that he had. Yeah. Again, John McCain is not Hitler. Please don't quote me as saying John McCain is Hitler. I don't think that's the case. But it's worth looking at that kind of an extreme to see where you really fall on a thing. And I don't want to eradicate John McCain's negative actions and votes just because he did some good stuff and just because he just died. Yep. And that's really what it boils down to.
All right, so this week's key discussion topic, we actually got a request from a listener, and so we're going to talk about circumcision this week.
So
where to start?
As you can imagine, I have a lot of very intense feelings about the issue of circumcision. So I think we should touch on, sort of like we did with the John McCain topic, we should touch on some facts. And we'll kind of intermittently give our opinions about those things as we move along, and then we'll kind of jump in with our thoughts.
So let's start with why it's popular in the U.S. Interestingly enough, it was seen as a cure for masturbation in the 19th century, I think. It started in England, carried over...
Well, let me just real quick backtrack. We don't mean circumcision started there. We just mean the more recent popularity. Yes. Well, no, but the more recent popularity. Circumcision can be traced back to ancient Egypt. So we just want to be careful to make sure that that's not what we're saying. Yes. We're saying that the more recent popularity in the U.S. comes from here.
Yes, sorry. Around it being a cure for masturbation, and the most recent figures we could find online, we did a little research from the National Center for Health Statistics, shows that there is definitely a decline. In the South, interestingly enough, it's fallen almost 15% from 1996 to 2003, and that the Midwest has the highest rates in the U.S.
That sort of surprises me, actually. I would have thought it'd be the Deep South.
Yeah, well, I think the Midwest is more dangerously religious than just the sweet Southern South that go to church every Sunday.
Well, we've talked about that before.
Sweet.
The sweet Southerners are typically not sweet, just Southern.
Yeah, but the West Coast has the lowest rates in the U.S.
Wonderful.
Interestingly enough, though, there is quite a difference outside of the U.S. I think what we find, 75% of all men in the world have intact foreskins.
Which, of course, I'm all for.
Yes.
I think intact, there's a word I used to use for myself. I called myself an intactivist. I didn't come up with that term. Some very brilliant person did. I did not. But, it's good to see that basically 75% of the world doesn't do this. I think there's a lot of reasons why you should not circumcise your child. There are very few good reasons why you should. In fact, I think all of the reasons why you should, while some may be valid in some ways, I think are not actual reasons why you should.
They're not valid for the masses.
Well, I don't. Well, sure, but we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But there's a really important piece. Look, we're not going to be able to cover the entire history of litigation and whatever was involved with circumcision. It's a very complex issue. Except that I think it's very simply you just shouldn't do it. But it's complex if you're actually trying to find the proper information. It can be difficult to find information. So we found a couple of kind of key moments. So in 1999, the American Academy of Pediatrics concluded that circumcision in babies was not recommended as a routine procedure. The American Medical Association and the American Academy of Family Physicians all hopped on board that decision and agreed. However, in 2007, the American Academy of Pediatrics formed a task force to evaluate, or I guess maybe reevaluate, the evidence available on circumcision. They determined that the procedure's benefits outweighed the risks and that it should be available to families who choose it. I think the word choice there is interesting, as they're not saying it should be done.
It should be done for everyone.
They're saying it should be allowed to be done, basically. It should be readily available. But the thing that bothers me is that they said the benefits outweigh the risks, because I disagree entirely.
The interesting thing is, based on those findings, most health insurance companies do not cover circumcision because it is deemed not medically necessary. So it is a cosmetic procedure. And
really, the only argument in favor of having not any cosmetic procedure, but like this in particular, would be augmenting a part of your body because of an already existing problem, which I totally understand. There can be an issue where the foreskin fuses with the glans, which is the head of the penis, and won't retract. And a lot of times, it depends. Sometimes they don't do anything about it because it doesn't cause any major problems, but sometimes it can, and the procedure to fix that would be a circumcision.
Right.
Or a partial at minimum. So there are times when it's necessary. For me, the issue is that overwhelmingly it's done when it's not necessary. And that's the problem I have with it.
And, most medically advanced nations don't practice child circumcision. It's not normal.
At least routine circumcision.
Yeah, routine, yeah.
Obviously, if it's medically necessary, they may do it.
Yeah, and Jewish and Muslim-based, faith-based families tend to, but I think, and I think I stated earlier, 75% of the world's men don't, or haven't been circumcised. So it's definitely dwindled in other countries, but not as much in the U.S. It is dwindling, but not as a fast a pace as anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think the piece we definitely need to point out here is that many people view it as like just a minor procedure. Oh, they're just going to take off a little bit of skin. But here's the thing. Circumcision typically removes about 10,000 nerve endings and a few feet worth of blood vessels. The glands, or the head of the penis, of a circumcised penis is less sensitive. It tends to be more dry, which causes pain and discomfort during penetration. And it decreases, basically every study shows that it decreases overall sexual pleasure. Some studies, interestingly, also show that it decreases the sexual pleasure that the female achieves. Yep. And I think a lot of this has to do with when you have an intact penis, the foreskin protects the glands, keeps it moist, and keeps it sensitive. So penetration is a much easier process, right? Yep. And that adds to the sensation for both parties. Okay, so that's kind of the unspoken part of this a lot of the times, is that it completely removes and actually, let me throw in kind of an awkward anecdote. And I apologize, anybody who knows me who's listening to this, but I distinctly remember as a kid, very, very young, starting to play with myself, and I would sort of injure myself, like superficially. I would tear a little bit at the skin because you don't have that shifting foreskin to help you glide up and down the shaft of your erect penis. So I had to kind of learn how to grip it in just such a way to give myself more motion. And I know that sounds like...
Which is exactly why they wanted to
right?
have you circumcised in the first place. They wanted to
discourage masturbation. Right. And not everybody's going to experience that, but it's just something that you just don't realize is a problem until you realize that it's not a problem somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and I think, this is it's why religion is dangerous, right? Every time somebody says, well, just let people do their own thing, let them have their own religion. Well, that would be fine and well and good if it didn't always infringe on non-religious people's rights.
More like if it never infringed on non-religious people's rights.
But it always does. And this is just another example of where religious, there was a religious desire to not let people masturbate because that's in the Bible. And this was their way to get around that, to skirt that issue and to solve that problem. And now, so many years later, we have so many advancements in the medical field. It's disappointing to continue to see jaded medical reports and medical guidance and things on the internet that you can find that will tell you that it's medically necessary, you must do it, and that there is a feeling when you're a mother in the hospital. My son is circumcised because it wasn't a question in the hospital to me, do you want to? It was, when do you want to schedule it? It wasn't a question. It was never a question. And I think that a lot of mothers face that, after you have your first child and you never did any research on it and this was the way you were raised and that's just what you did. And you didn't question it.
I think kind of the key thing here is just what I said at the beginning. There may be, medical benefits. I'm not a doctor. I can't say for sure there are or aren't, but most of the reports tend to say there are. And the thing about these medical benefits is that they're not applied universally to every other aspect of our health, right? So they say, okay, well, we did a bunch of studies that show that men are less likely to contract HIV and HPV if they are circumcised. That may be true. From what I understand, a lot of those numbers are pretty minimal, but also there's been a lot of questions raised about these studies because they're almost exclusively done in Africa where there is an AIDS epidemic. So you're going to see more cases anyway, and there's going to be fluctuations in rates of infection, right? But also there are other factors. It's not just sexual intercourse that spreads AIDS. So a lot of people brought up that these studies just aren't as clear cut as they seem to say they are. And I think that's, something you should do the research on yourself. It is honestly a little daunting to do. So good luck. But here's the thing. Here's my thing. Most of these medically beneficial things talk about stuff like urinary tract infections, right? It's not a life-threatening thing. It's not that big of a deal.
Easily treatable.
Yeah, and
many times not even treated.
A lot of these things revolve around hygiene, right? So, that's just areas that my son's going to have to clean, and if he doesn't clean it right, he's going to get infections. Well, I don't think it's that difficult to get a young boy to play with his penis in the shower, okay? I don't think it's that big of a deal. But the issue, and this is what I alluded to a minute ago about it not being applied universally, is we have all kinds of things, all kinds of body parts that are likely to cause us problems, and we don't remove them in infancy just in case, right? Yeah. The second most common form of cancer in the world is breast cancer, one of the leading causes of death in women. But we don't remove glands and tissue at birth or within a few weeks of birth just so they don't have to deal with that one day because it's a possibility, right? Yeah. We don't do that.
Yeah.
And the reason we don't do that is because that's
absurd. It doesn't make sense.
Right? If we found out that the most likely place to have a cancerous growth was on your pinky toe, would we start chopping off pinky toes of our infants? I don't think we would. I think we'd wait to see if there was a problem and then handle it accordingly.
But let's chop off the end of his penis.
Oh yeah, let's just take some skin off, right? And it's not some tiny amount. I know I said that already, but this is a lot of stuff that you're removing, okay? The process takes 5 to 10 minutes. It's not like, snip, we're done.
And 7 to 10 days to heal. And the baby is in pain through most of those 7 to 10 days.
Absolutely. I mean, the foreskin is there to protect the end of your penis, the glands of your penis, and you have removed it. So not only is the baby experiencing the pain from the actual open wounds, the cuts, right? But they're also experiencing discomfort because the glands of their penis is rubbing around inside their diaper, and this is not something they should be experiencing, and so it's not, they're not prepared for that, right? But it's also like the appendix. I mean, what is it? 50,000 some odd people, just over 50,000 people died in 2015 or 2016. I forget which one now, but from appendicitis, 2015. In the U.S., more than 300,000 people every year have their appendix removed. So why not just take it out at birth, right?
Because it doesn't make sense to do that.
We should not be conducting invasive surgical procedures on our children just in case. That is, in my opinion, possibly the most absurd argument I've ever heard. How does that make any sense?
It doesn't. It just doesn't.
It doesn't.
So that's our opinion on it. Don't do it. Just don't do it. There's no need. Well, and you know what? If a child needs it or an adult needs it, there is the ability to have a circumcision at another age. But don't do it to your infant for no good damn reason.
That's the thing. We talk about bodily autonomy, right? I say we, atheists. It tends to be a topic that comes up a lot, especially in discussions about things like abortion, right? So we keep saying bodily autonomy is the driving factor of all of these issues. And yet we're willing to take that away from our children because someone said we should. And that,
because we've always done it that way.
Right? That's how we've always done it. It just strikes me as absolutely insane. I apologize for calling it insane. But, like, it is kind of insane, right? That we're going to cut off a piece of a penis at birth.
Yes.
I did want to, I know we're sort of wrapping this up, but I did want to backtrack a tiny bit just because a lot of people say, well, it's not, what harm is it going to do? They don't feel it. They feel it, but they're not going to remember it. And, they're never going to know the difference when they're adults. That's just what they've always had. And some of that I kind of agree with. Like, I don't look at my penis and, like,
get sad,
stare at it thinking I wish I had my foreskin. At the same time, and this is a conversation my mother and I had to have a while back because I don't think it's her fault, as she was told that it was just what you needed to do medically. I really feel violated that our society has allowed this to happen, and as a result, I am missing who knows how much of the foreskin that should be protecting my penis. I feel like that's been a violation on my rights, and it's something that I don't think we should just be letting go. And more studies are showing that things like early childhood pain, especially like traumatic pain, not just bumping into a wall, can decrease your ability to withstand pain as you grow up. Your pain threshold decreases. Circumcision has, and again, we don't have time for this, so I'm just going to summarize. Circumcision has all kinds of negative physical and mental connotations, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Impacts?
Impacts, sure. That's not the word I'm thinking of, but whatever. Not a big deal.
But it works.
It impacts us negatively in a lot of ways that we know. I wonder how many ways it impacts us that we don't understand. We don't know yet. We know that children who go through trauma, whether they remember it or not, have problems dealing with those kinds of things mentally, emotionally. Yep. This is no different. If you wouldn't want to chop off their pinky toe to prevent a cancerous development,
chopping off their penis,
then leave their penis alone. Leave it alone. It's not your choice. It's his.
Done. So that was a great topic. We appreciate our listener mail, our listener feedback. So want to plug that again. If you have any topics for us or any thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is John, that's Jon, at stayathomeatheist.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and by searching the Stay at Home Atheist.
Oh, and Reddit.
There's
nothing there yet, but there is a page.
We're working on it. And you can also comment here on YouTube. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to ding the bell so that you get notifications when our new episodes come out.
Bertrand Russell once said, "The good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge." Thanks for joining us.
Talk to you next time.
Thousands and thousands are humming, the second coming's coming. The environmental responsibility is succumbing to the suicidal longing for paradise. Can't they see it's already before our eyes? just who we are. We find cannot survive without our mind. But just so afraid to die.